Okay, so I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, malik yawm al-din, iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een, ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim, ghayri al-maghdubi alayhim wa lad-dallin, sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله وعلى أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. So we begin tonight as we began on the night of his martyrdom and again on his Arba'een with the Book of God. The first chapter is the one that has carried the whole of this series, from Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, third chapter of the Quran, and its verses 169 through 170, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And do not think of those who have been killed in the way of God as dead. Rather, they are alive with their Lord receiving provision, rejoicing in what God has bestowed upon them of his bounty." We have said it on every night of this series and we say it again tonight, because tonight, of all nights, we may be tempted to forget it. He is not dead. He is alive. And we set beside tonight the verse that we've just said, a second verse, a verse about trust. Because tonight is about a trust. This is from Surah Ahzab, the chapter of the Confederates, which is the same chapter, you will recall, from which our leader took his final message. And it's verse number 72 of Surah Ahzab, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, "Indeed, we offered the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, and they declined to bear it and were afraid of it, but man bore it." The trust, what we call al-amana, a weight so great that the heavens refused it, the earth refused it, the mountains refused it, and trembled at the very thought of the offer. And yet a human being picked it up. I want you to hold both of these verses tonight. The first tells us that he is alive. The second tells us what he carried, and what in these last 4 months has been placed into our hands. Please give me a loud salawat, and we move on to the first point, which is the trust we are asked to keep.
اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على
محمد
محمد
وعلى
وعلى
آل
محمد
عجل
عجل
فرجه.
فرجه.
So I want to begin with something that perhaps some of you have felt, and perhaps some of you have said out loud. For 4 months, our leader has lain unburied. 4 months. And in our tradition, we don't wait. When a believer dies, we hasten. We wash, we shroud, we pray, and we return them to the earth, often within a single day, within 24 hours. It is one of the first things that we're taught regarding death, that to honor the dead is to be swift with them. And so a question that's been sitting quietly in many hearts, a question some of you perhaps have not dared to ask out loud because it almost felt disloyal or wrong in some way to ask it. Why has he not been buried? 4 months, is that allowed? Has something gone wrong? Has our leader, who gave everything, been denied even the swift and dignified burial that the poorest believer is owed? I'm not going to pretend that you haven't wondered this. People have called me, I know people have wondered this. And honesty is the method of this series. It always has been. And tonight, honesty means saying the quiet question out loud and then answering it fully from the Book of God and the rulings of our scholars. So let me say it plainly here at the very start, and then let me spend the night proving it to you. The weight was not neglect. The weight was entirely lawful. The weight was indeed deliberate. And the weight was, in its own strange and beautiful way, an honor. Because think again about the second verse that I quoted. God offered the trust to the heavens and the earth, and they were afraid, and they set it down. Our leader was offered a trust, the trust of Wilayah, the guardianship of the whole Ummah in the path of the Imam of our time. May our souls be his ransom, and may God hasten his return. For he was the Wali Amr al-Muslimin, the guardian of the affairs of the Muslims. Not of one country, not of the Shia alone, but of all Muslims. And do not pass over that word too quickly. And the word being al-amana, the trust. Because our own Imams were asked, what is it? This weight that the heaven and the earth and the mountains were offered and refused to bear it and indeed trembled at it. Imam al-Ridha, peace and blessings be upon him, was asked about this very verse. And he answered in a single word. And like with all of our sessions, the references are in the write-up. I invite everyone to review the write-up carefully. Imam al-Ridha was asked about this, and he said the trust is the Wilayah, the guardianship. The trust the mountains could not carry is the Wilayah. And for 36 years, our leader carried it, and he never once set it down. The trust was kept, and then he was taken. And in the 4 months since, a smaller trust has been placed upon the whole of this Ummah, the trust of his own body, to guard it, to honor it, to keep it from harm in a time of war, and to carry it at last, not in haste, but with the whole community gathered to the place where it belongs. And alhamdulillah, God be praised, the Ummah has kept it. The trust was kept. 2 days ago, his body completed its final journey. Not quietly, not in secret, not hidden away, but carried through the cities of the people of the house. Past Shah Abdul Azim in Tehran, past Imam al-Khamenei between Tehran and Qom, past Sayyidah Fatima Ma'suma in Qom, past Imam Ali in Najaf, past Imam al-Hussein in Karbala, past Imams al-Kadhim and Jawad in Kadhimiyya, past Imam al-Hadi and Askari in Samarra, and at last laid to rest beside Imam al-Ridha in Mashhad, the city of his birth. He was laid in the earth on Thursday, the eve of the martyrdom of Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zayn al-Abidin, peace and blessings be upon him. And yesterday the whole Ummah mourned that very Imam, the one who survived Karbala to carry its testimony forward. The witness laid to rest on the eve of the witness. And tonight we gather, 2 days on, with the earth still fresh above him. This was not an ending, it was rather a homecoming, and it is a handover. The body has returned to its Lord. As we say, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Indeed we belong to God, and to him is our return. And the covenant has returned to our hands. Please give me a loud salawat, and I'll give you the bridge from the chain to the testimony to the trust.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
So some of you were perhaps here with us for the first of these sessions, the Unbroken Chain, on the night when the wound was fresh. This was, I believe, on the 2nd of March. And some of you were here with us 40 days later for the Unbroken Testimony on his Arba'een, which was on around the 11th of April. In the chain, we spoke of the institution that does not break, the Wilayah that outlives any one man, because it was never held together by a single man, but by a covenant with God. In the testimony, we spoke of the message that does not die, the witness written in blood that grows louder with every empire that tries to silence it. The chain was the institution that endures. The testimony was the message that endures. And tonight, the trust, the amana that is kept and carried home, the body returned to its Lord, and the covenant placed now in our hands. If the first 2 sessions asked what survives him, tonight asks a quieter and much more intimate question. What were we asked to keep while we waited? And more importantly, did we keep it? And will we keep it going forward? So what are we going to cover tonight? We're going to speak about 3 things. Firstly, the lawfulness of the wait. We will answer the question in the room properly from the fiqh, from the hadith, why a believer who must be buried in haste could lawfully wait for 4 months. And we will see that this is not new, and it happened only last year, to a Sayyid we all loved, and that has happened for thousands of years to the friends of God. Second, the sanctity of the entrusted body. Why the long wait did not diminish him by a single degree, and what it asked of us who were given the keeping of it. And third, the homecoming. What it means to be laid to rest in the courtyard of Imam al-Ridha and carried there through Najaf, through Karbala, through Kadhimiyya, through Samarra, through Qom, and what is now handed to us, the living, to carry in his place. And we will close, as we always do, with a naming of our beloved shuhada, our beloved witnesses or martyrs, from the earliest to this very household, and a supplication that asks God to make us worthy of the trust that has been left in our hands. In the name of the Lord of the trust and the Lord of the martyrs and the truthful, let us begin. Please give me a very loud salawat, and we move to the lawfulness of the wait.
اللهم صل
اللهم
على
صل على
محمد
محمد
وآل
وآل
محمد وعجل
محمد وعجل
فرجهم.
فرجهم.
So let me begin where the question is still warm, because I left it unanswered at the opening, and I promised you that I would not leave it unanswered. In our tradition, we do not keep the dead waiting. This is not a custom, it is a command. Open the chapters of our law on the dead, and the very heading under which the rulings are gathered tells you everything. For example, in Wasail al-Shia, Sheikh Khor al-Amili, and the references are all in the write-up, says, he has a chapter which says, the chapter on the obligation of hastening the preparation and burial of the deceased, and the prohibition of delaying it except for a lawful purpose. Listen to the two halves of that heading, because the whole of this first point lives within that. Firstly, you have the obligation to hasten, and then the prohibition of delay except for a lawful purpose. And the Imams themselves gave us and told us that the command could not be plainer. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him, has said, again, the references are all in the write-up, when someone dies, do not detain him. Hasten with him to his grave. Do not detain him. So the question is not something trivial, it's not a small question. It is sharp and it is very fair. If this is the law, if the believer is to be buried in haste, if delay is named a prohibition, then how did we let our beloved leader lie unburied for 4 months? How is that not a wrong that was done to him? I'm not going to wave that question away. The law did say, the books of hadith say, hasten. So I owe you not just a feeling, but proof. I owe you the very door that the law itself has opened for exactly this type of scenario. And before we open the books, let me remind you of something that you already know. Because we have all seen this before, not in some distant history book, but a mere last year, the case that we all lived. In September of 2024, the enemies of God and humanity martyred Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, may God rest his pure soul. And he was not buried on that day. He was not buried that week. For the safety of the living and for the dignity of his body in a time of war, he was given a temporary, hidden resting place. And the great public farewell and his permanent grave came many months after. In fact, nearly 5 months later, in February of 2025, an ocean of human beings gathered to lay him to rest at last. And beside him was Sayyid Hashim Safiyuddin, may God rest his pure soul, who was taken only a few days after Sayyid Hassan. 5 months, and not one scholar amongst us called it a scandal. On the contrary, the scholars explained it openly at the time that burial may be delayed where circumstances compel it, that a believer may be laid in a temporary place and then carried to his proper one, so long as his body is kept from harm. This is nothing new. We watched it happen months ago for a Sayyid that we all wept for. And our own leader, Imam Sayyid Ali al-Husseini Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, stood and eulogized Sayyid Hassan. And do you remember what the mourners said in their grief as they carried Sayyid Hassan? Inna ala al-ahdi, we are committed to the covenant. We keep the trust. And indeed, the trust was kept and it will be kept. But there's also a 1,000-year precedent. So if we think that our own age is not enough, maybe in our own age it's a bit of an anomaly, then we go back 1,000 years to two brothers among the greatest our tradition has ever produced. Al-Sharif al-Radi, the man who gathered the words of the commander of the faithful, Imam Ali, into the book we call Nahj Balagha, and his brother Al-Sharif Murtada Alim al-Huda, the teacher of the whole age. We learnt about both of these brothers in our Mahdawiyya sessions on Wednesday, and we will continue inshallah after Arba'een. They both died in Baghdad, and they were not left there. They were carried to rest in the courtyard of their grandfather, Imam al-Hussein, in Karbala. Ibn Maytham al-Bahrani records in the opening of his commentary, his well-known famous commentary on Nahj Balagha, and you can find the reference in the write-up. And I want to be exact, as we always try and be. This is actually a biographer's report, but it's not a narration from an infallible. But nevertheless, it's a historical fact. Ibn Maytham al-Bahrani writes, he, meaning Sharif al-Radi, was buried together with his brother al-Murtada in the vicinity of his grandfather, Imam al-Hussein, peace and blessings be upon him. Their own father had been laid to rest prior to them within the shrine of Imam al-Hussein itself. A family carried across distance and across time to rest beside the master of witnesses in Karbala. And I want you to hold that image because it's not only 1,000 years old. It was this very week, because the very courtyard of Imam al-Hussein to which these two brothers were carried, Karbala, was on our own leader's road a few days ago, as his body was finally carried home. And there is a precedent older still and higher than these two brothers. The body of the Master of Martyrs himself denied its grave upon the sands of Karbala. But that one belongs to our second point, and I will bring it to you there, God willing. So now let us open the books and name very precisely the lawful purposes for which the law that commands haste permits the waste. And there are four, and all four are standing in this very moment. So first, that he be carried to the shrines of the people of the house. This is not merely permitted, in fact it is loved. Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, he writes in his Tahrir al-Wasila, and you can find the references, like I say, in the write-up. Imam Khamenei writes, it is permissible to transfer the deceased from the town of his death to another town before burial, though with dislike, except to the honored shrines and the sacred places. There is no dislike in transferring to them. Rather, in it there is merit and indeed a recommendation. And our own leader, Imam Sayyid Ali Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, himself ruled exactly the same in his own rules of fiqh, of practical laws. He writes that to carry the deceased to the sacred shrines before burial is permitted and indeed recommended, so long as it brings no indignity upon him and the delay is not such that the people would count it as disrespect. The references, like I say, are always in the write-up. And the classical masters has said it centuries before. If we go all the way back to Shahid Awwal, the author of Lum'ah, and again, the references in the write-up, Shahid Awwal writes, burial must be hastened once the preparations are complete. To delay it without excuse is forbidden, and to delay it for an excuse is permitted, and likewise to transfer him to the honored shrines before his burial, provided no decomposition is feared, is also permitted. Provided no decomposition is feared. Keep that condition in your mind because we will need that momentarily. The second, necessity, the necessity of war. This is the reason that the authorities themselves have given. The committee charged with his farewell stated it plainly, that the burial was held back by the conditions of war, by the airstrikes, by the danger to the millions who would gather, by the simple duty to keep the living safe. More than 100 days for the safety of the people. And here I must be careful with you, more careful than anywhere else in tonight's session. Because there is a principle our law uses for moments like this, and it is one of the most misused sentences in the whole of our religion. People tear it loose from its place and wave it like a key that opens every locked door. So let me give it to you whole, with the fence that God has built around it. In the very same breath, he gives the permission. It begins in the Quran. When God lists what is forbidden, things like the carrion, the blood, the flesh of swine, He does not leave the starving man to die beside them. Rather, he says, this is Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, second chapter of the Quran, verse number 173. But whoever is compelled, neither craving it nor transgressing, there is no sin upon him. Look at how the permission arrives already chained. Compelled, not merely inconvenienced. Neither craving, a person may take no appetite in such a thing, nor transgressing. He may not go one mouthful past his need. And again in Surah An'am, the chapter of the cattle, sixth chapter of the Quran, verse 119, God says, God sets out the forbidden thing in detail, except that to which you are driven by necessity. And from the words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, his family and righteous companions, in the narrations our scholars call the hadith of the lifting. References in the write-up. Prophet Muhammad says, lifted from my community is that to which they are compelled. Now, from these roots, the Quran, the narrations, our jurists drew the maxim, necessities permit the forbidden. A settled maxim of Islamic jurisprudence, what we call al-Qaida al-Fiqhiyya, set down amongst the governing legal maxims by our scholars, and you can find the references in the write-up. Now, hear me, and this is very important. This is not a key to every door. It is not a loophole. It is the narrowest passage in the law, and it is hedged on every side. Let me name the fences so that no one ever carries this sentence out of here and abuses it, as unfortunately many, many people do. First, it does not abolish the original ruling. It only suspends it, and only suspends it while the necessity is actually standing in the room. The moment the necessity lifts, the original command returns in full. The duty to hasten the burial never died. It was merely held back, and the instant it was safe, it immediately returned. That is why he was buried this last week. The moment the danger had passed, and not a day later that it absolutely had to be. Second, and this is its own maxim on its constant guard, necessity is measured strictly by its own measure. You can find the references in the write-up. This is a companion maxim to the first, set down beside the first in those same books of legal maxims. You may take from the forbidden only the exact amount the necessity forces upon you. Not 1 inch, not 1 hour more. A delay of war buys only the delay of the days of war. It never bought a single day of carelessness. Third, the bar is genuine compulsion, a genuine, real hardship, a real harm, what we call haraj or darar. Not a preference or a convenience, not which is merely easier. The danger to the millions who would gather under the bombs is that bar. A wish to wait would never have been. Fourth, it is never for the individual to declare himself. It is the jurist, and here the authority of the Wali Amr al-Muslimin, the guardian of the affairs of the Muslims, in our time, Imam Sayyid Mujtaba al-Husayni al-Khamenei, who weighs the necessity and the rule. This was not a family's choice or a committee's convenience. It was a ruling made where rulings are actually made. And fifth, the one that holds up the whole of our next point, necessity never, ever licenses an assault upon the sanctity of the body itself. Whatever was permitted in the waiting, his hurma, his dignity, was never on the table. The door that opens for delay does not open for indignity. The second martyr, Shahid al-Thani, gathers this whole matter into a single governing rule in his great commentary on Lum'ah titled Al-Rawdat al-Bahiyya. References again are in the write-up. The rule governing all of it, whatever in the hastening of burial would entail hardship or harm, delay is permitted on account of it. So this is not some sort of random loophole. It is a door that the law itself cut, narrowed, guarded, opened by the jurists and closed the very instant that the danger had passed, and never once at the cost of the dignity of the one who waited. And lest anyone imagine even for a moment that waiting is somehow foreign to the way of the Imams themselves command a wait in their own rulings. For the drowned and for the one struck down senseless, Imam Musa al-Kadhim, peace and blessings be upon him, has taught us. References are in the write-up. The lightning struck and the drowned, one waits upon him 3 days, unless he changes before that. 3 days, by the command of the Imams themselves, held back for a reason, to be certain that death had actually come. And listen to the limit they placed upon it, unless he changes before that. The weight was bound by the body itself, by the very first signs of decay, which is the very same line you will notice that governs how a body may be lawfully kept today, only so long as it is preserved from change. The Imam's own weight and the law of preservation we spoke of a mere moments ago are guarded by one and the same boundary. The weight, where there is a reason, is not a breaking or manipulation of the law. Rather, it is the law. The third, that his body be kept lawfully throughout the wait. And here is the answer to a question perhaps some of you have carried in silence, and I would rather speak it than let it sit and ache. What was done with his body all of this time? And the answer is the plainest thing in the world, and the law permits it without difficulty. He was kept, preserved in the cold, as the body of any believer may be preserved when there is a lawful reason to wait. Our leader himself ruled on this very question when it was put to him. You can find the reference in the write-up. He said that to use refrigeration, to use the means that hold a body back from decay, is in itself no problem at all, so long as nothing is done that would dishonor him. But hear the limit, because the honesty of this series demands it. This permission is not a license to keep a body forever, to set it aside in place of burial. Imam Sayyid Ali Khamenei was severe about exactly this, that one may not simply deposit a body indefinitely into a refrigeration unit and imagine it to be some type of piety. The body must, in the end, be returned to the earth. The preservation is permitted for the sake of the burial, to make the burial possible, never to replace it. The cold was never the destination. It was only the road to the grave. And the fourth, and this is the most beautiful of them all, he could have been buried sooner, and he was held back deliberately so that the burial would not fall within the first 10 nights of Muharram, so that the Ummah could finish mourning Imam al-Hussein, so that nothing, not even the burial of the Wali al-Faqih himself, would stand in the way of Sayyid al-Shuhada, the Master of Witnesses. And I'll return to that at the very end of this point, because it's the lesson the whole of it has been carrying toward us. There's one last question a careful believer might raise, and it's a good one, the kind that comes from love and from knowledge both. We know there is a martyr our Lord does not wash. The one who falls on the field of battle is buried in his very clothes, and we'll discuss this a lot more in detail in our Arba'een sessions. Because the blood of such a martyr is his own purity, and it will testify for him on the day of resurrection. So is our leader one such martyr? Should he not have been buried as he fell unwashed? And here again, it is our leader's own ruling that answers for us. He was asked precisely who that unwashed martyr is, and he replies, the reference, like I always say, is in the write-up. The martyr who is neither washed nor shrouded is the one slain on the battlefield, fighting the unbelievers, the rebels, and their like, by the command of the infallible Imam, peace and blessings be upon him, or his special deputy. And in the age of occultation, the fighters who are martyred in the arenas of the defense of Islam and the Muslims, by the command of the guardian jurist, the Wali al-Faqih, are counted among the martyrs who are neither washed nor shrouded on the basis of obligatory precaution, on the field of battle. And our leader was not struck on the field of battle with a weapon in his hand, in the line of fighting. He was struck in his own house by a fire sent from far away by cowards. So by his own ruling, he was washed, he was shrouded, and he was prayed over in every city through which he passed. And we will cover the prayer shortly. He is a martyr of the hereafter, al-Maqtul dhulman, one slain in injustice. And he was given the full reward of the witness, of the martyr, as we will learn in the Arba'een sessions, and the full and ordinary dignity of a believer returning to his Lord. And do not for even a second imagine that the washing is a lesser thing. It is not. It is the believer's own honor to be made pure and wrapped in white and given back to the earth as every servant of God prays to be given back. The glory of the battlefield martyr is written on his skin in his blood. The glory of this one is hidden where it has always lived, in the soul. Now we go back to something I said moments ago, because it stopped you perhaps, and it stopped a great many people this week. I told you that he was prayed over. We even saw it, maybe we watched the funeral. But this subject, this point, requires a little more depth. He was not prayed over just once. He was prayed over in Tehran, in the Grand Musalla. He was prayed over again in Qom, in Masjid Jamkaran, in Najaf, in Karbala, and finally in Mashhad. City after city, congregation after congregation. The funeral prayer said again and again and again over the same body. And many of you perhaps have wondered quietly, is that right? Is the funeral prayer not just said once and finished? How is it prayed 5 times over one man? So let me answer this fully, because the answer opens something really quite beautiful. First, why it may be repeated. To understand this, you have to understand what this prayer is. Because Salat al-Mayyit, or Namaz al-Janaza, the prayer of over the dead, is not a prayer like the ones we pray 5 times a day. Our scholars are very exact about this. Shaykh Awwal writes, and the references are in the write-up, the prayer over the dead is 5 takbirs, that's Allahu Akbar, and it is a supplication, not a prayer. So purity from ritual impurity and from filth is not a condition in it. A supplication, not a prayer. It only carries the name prayer. And Shaykh al-Thani, the second martyr, explains in his commentary that it is called salat, or prayer, only in following the Prophet's own usage. For the laws of ritual purity were laid down for the prayer that has bowing and prostration, and this one has neither. Look at it and you will see. There is no bowing in it, there is no prostration, there is no sitting. You do not need to be in a state of wudu, the ablution that leads to ritual purity and is a requirement prior to every other prayer, in order to pray this, because it is not that kind of prayer. It has 5 takbirs, 5 times Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest, and between them supplications. That is it. A standing dua for a soul that has gone on ahead of us. And why 5? The Imams give us a reason so tender, it is really worth stopping on and reflecting. Imam al-Baqir, peace and blessings be upon him, said to one of his companions, you can find the references in the write-up, 5 takbirs, 5 times Allahu Akbar. The 5 takbirs were taken from the 5 daily prayers. From each prayer, 1 takbir. The number of takbirs is beyond dispute. This narration, which tells us why they are 5, our scholars relate as a reason. And I give it to you simply as that. Do you see the mercy in that? From every one of the 5 prayers a believer stood through every day, across the whole of his life, God set aside a single takbir, a single Allahu Akbar, and kept it to be said over him on the day he could no longer pray for himself. His own prayers saved up and given back to him to carry home. Now, a dua is not something you say once and you lock away. A dua, a supplication, can be made by one and then by another and then by 1,000 or 1,000,000 more. There is no used up in supplication. So when city after city, multitude after multitude rose to pray over him, was that a mistake or an excess? Let me clarify it precisely. because this is exactly the place where people become confused. And clarity or tabyin is a lesson that we have learned from Imam Sayyid Ali Khamenei, and it is a debt that we owe everyone. The well-known position amongst our jurists, the view of the majority, as the Sahib of al-Jawahir records it, one of the senior scholars, is that to repeat the funeral prayer over a single body is disliked or makruh. And the reason is the very principle we open this whole night upon. Do not keep the believer waiting. Do not hold his body back from the earth to run one gathering after another. And there is a narration underneath this. Imam al-Sadiq says, you can find the reference in the write-up, the prayer is not repeated over the deceased once it has been prayed over him. So the dislike guards a right. The dead man's right to be carried swiftly to his rest and not kept waiting above the ground. But hold on. Because the very jurists who set that dislike down carved an exception into that same breath. And it reads as though it were written for a night exactly like the ones that we have experienced in the last few days. Sayyid al-Yazdi gathers it in his Urwat al-Wuthqa, which is one of the most important books in the science of Fiqh or Islamic Jurisprudence. The references are all in the write-up. He writes, it is disliked to repeat the funeral prayer over the deceased, except if the deceased is of the people of merit and knowledge and piety. Except if the deceased is of the people of merit and knowledge and piety. Think about that. And then think about who we have just buried. And our two living authorities, or rather, said Sistani and Imam Khamenei, whose rulings are still valid, they both say the following. Imam Khamenei writes, it is disliked to pray over the deceased several times, but if the deceased is a person of knowledge and piety, it is not disliked. The reference is in the write-up. And Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sistani goes a step further still. And again, his references are also in the write-up. He turned a scrutiny upon the very narration the dislike rests upon, weighed it and held that it does not stand firm enough to bind everyone to it. Said Sistani writes, it is permissible to repeat the funeral prayer over one deceased, but it is disliked according to what has been said, though it has not been established. And if the deceased is of the people of honor in religion, it is permissible with no dislike at all. Now see how these two great marajah, two great sources of emulation, two great scholars, close upon the truth from either side. One tells you the dislike was never firmly established to begin with. The other grants it as a general rule and then lifts it away entirely for a man of knowledge and piety. And between the two of them, there is not 1 inch of room left for hesitation over a man like Imam Sayyid Ali al-Khamenei. For who was he, if he was not the very one both of these exceptions were written for? He was a faqih, he was the wali al-faqih, and he was a marja, he was a source of emulation, a mujtahid. He was the wali amr al-Muslimin, the guardian of the affairs of the Muslims, a man of knowledge and of honor in the religion and of piety. If those words are to carry any meaning at all, they certainly apply to him. So the prayers said over him in city after city were not merely permitted, they were actually entirely fitting. And mark this, the single concern that ever lay beneath the dislike, that a body not be held back from its grave. This was never in question over here. He was prayed over as he was carried along the road to his rest. Not for 1 hour was he kept from the earth to make room for another prayer. So the Ummah did for him what the law entirely allows and what love demanded. It prayed over him and prayed over him and prayed over him again. And consider who rose to lead these prayers. In Tehran, you had Ayatollah Ja'far Subhani. In Qom, you had Ayatollah Jawadi Amoli. And the prayer that Ayatollah Jawadi did, I really wish I had the time to discuss it, inshallah, in a future session. But it was truly most profound. And in Mashhad, you had Ayatollah Sayyid Mustafa al-Husseini Khamenei, his eldest son. And in Najaf and in Karbala, he was received and prayed over by the scholars and the people of Iraq. The most senior teachers of the Hawza, the grand marajah of our age, each rising to stand over him. the greatest scholars of the Ummah leading the prayer for their leader. And now the words themselves, because this prayer is a testimony. But before we continue, please give me a very loud salawat.
اللهم
اللهم
صل
صل
على
على
محمد
محمد
وآل
وآل
محمد
محمد
وعجل
وعجل
فرجهم.
فرجهم.
Let me give you the whole of what is said over him. Generally, the mustahab portion. I can't go into the prayer of Ayatollah Jawadi Amali because it would be much longer and much more deeper. Inshallah, like I said, we will go through that at a future time. Because these words, even these words in the standard prayer, if you like, are words that each and every one of us can carry. The first point, of course, is the niyyah, the intention. And we have covered the intention before in some of our sessions on the Lantern of the Path, and we will mention it briefly later. The prayer carries 5 takbir, 5 declarations of God is the greatest, each of which is followed by a supplication or testimony. And you can find the Arabic for all of these in the write-up. So after the first takbir, the first Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest, there is the testimony of faith. I will only read the English for the sake of brevity and because this is our way over here. We say, I testify that there is no God but God alone. No partner has he, and I testify that Muhammad is his servant and his messenger, whom he sent with the truth, a bearer of glad tidings and a warner before the coming of the hour. After the second takbir, there are blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad and his family. And it says, O God, bless Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and grant favor to Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and have mercy on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, as the best of what you blessed and favored and had mercy upon Abraham and the family of Abraham. Indeed, you are praiseworthy and glorious. Then you have the third takbir, following which is a plea for all the believers, the living of them and those passed on. We say, O God, forgive the believing men and the believing women, the submitting men and the submitting women, those of whom who are alive and those who have died. And then the fourth takbir, over the body itself. Now we turn to him. And here are the words that the Ahlul Bayt taught in their fuller and recommended form. Again, the Arabic is available in the write-up and the references are all in the write-up. We say, O God, this is your servant, the son of your servant, the son of your maidservant. He has come down into your courtyard, and you are the best before whom one is laid. O God, we know of him nothing except good, and you know him better than we do. O God, if he was a doer of good, increase his good, and if he did wrong, look over or pass over his wrongs. O God, place him with you in the highest reaches of the garden, and be a guardian over the family that he has left behind, and have mercy upon him, O most merciful of the merciful. Then you have the fifth takbir or the fifth Allahu Akbar, and khalas, it is finished. There is no sitting, there is no tashahhud, the testimony at the end of the prayer. There is no salam, the salutation at the end of the prayer. A standing testimony and a plea, and then we let him go. Now hear the fourth supplication again, because it is the heart of the whole thing. We know of him nothing except good, and you know him better than we do. Do you hear what that is? The funeral prayer is a shahada, a testimony, a witness. The community gathers over its dead and bears witness to his goodness before God. And in the eyes of God, this is not something small. Imam Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him, says, and the reference is always in the write-up, when a believer dies and 40 believing men attend his funeral and say, O God, we know of him nothing except good, and you know him better than we do. God blessed and exalted him be he, says, I have allowed your testimony and I have forgiven him what I know of him that you do not know. 40 witnesses and God accepts their testimony and forgives on the strength of it. 40. And how many stood over him? Not 40, but according to the latest figures, around 43 million in city after city, bearing the very same witness. we know of him nothing except good. We have spoken across this entire series of the witness, the shaheed, the one who testifies. We have had during our nights of Ashura and the upcoming nights of Arba'een on the subject of shahada or witness. And here at the very last, the Ummah, the community itself, becomes the witness for him. And for most of our dead, we say those words in hope, testifying to the good we saw and leaving the hidden, gently to the one who knows the secret self we never could. And that is the mercy folded into, you know him better than we do. We vouch for the outward, and we do not set ourselves up to be his judge. However, for this man, at least 36 years of it before our very eyes, the Ummah said, we know of him nothing except good, and its voice did not shake. Now the third thing, the one I want you to carry with you. I said that this prayer is a dua, a supplication that each and every person makes. Hear now how completely true that is and how. In the prayers that you pray behind an Imam every day at the mosque, the Imam carries the recitation for you. He recites the Fatiha, you stand silent, and his recitation stands in for yours in Salat Jama'ah. But not here. In the prayer over the dead, there is no carrying. Every soul in that congregation says every takbir, him or herself, and every supplication, him or herself. The Imam says it aloud, and we quietly follow him, but we all say it. This prayer cannot be prayed for you. Shoulder pressed to shoulder, and yet each and every one prays the whole of it alone. What we call jama'ah or congregational on the outside, but furada or individual within. And you see where that carries us. It means that the prayer over him was never the possession of the crowds in Tehran or Qom or Najaf or Karbala or Kadhimiya, Samarra or Mashhad alone. Every believer who lifted his hand said the whole of it himself. But hold that thought, because it opens onto something every believer ought to carry, and few are ever taught plainly and clearly. And since tabeen or clarification tonight is the whole of our task, let us quickly go through this. Please give me a salawat, and then we move on to the map, the 5 kinds of rulings. And this is quite important. I'm going to try and make it not technical, but please bear with me and give me a loud salawat if you're with me.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعجل فرجهم.
So, you've heard me this very night use words like wajib and makruh and mustahab. Let me stop and set the whole map for you in your hand. The 5 weights by which our religion measures every act a human being can do. And this is very simplified, but this should give us something to work with. We will hear these 5 words for the rest of our lives. We know them, and the sacred law begins to open before us. Firstly, there is wajib, the obligatory, what God requires of you. Do it, you are rewarded. Leave it, and you have sinned. Things like your prayers, your fasting. Then you have haram, the forbidden, its mirror, what God has shut off. Do it and you have sinned. Things like a lie, an injustice, wealth that is not yours. Then there is the mustahab, the recommended, what God loves but does not demand. Do it and he rewards you. Leave it and there is no sin upon you. Things like the night prayer, the charity that no one asked of you, those extra fuller words of the very funeral supplication that we recited a mere moments ago. Then there is the makruh, that which is disliked. What God would rather you leave, though he has not forbidden it. Leave it and he rewards you. Do it and you carry no sin. And it was this word, makruh, that stood behind the whole question of our repeating the prayer, as we mentioned earlier. And there is mubah, that which is permitted, is simply allowed. What the law neither asks of you nor forbids you. The color of your shirt, what you have for your lunch, of course, if it's not from haram places. There is no reward in it and there is no sin in it. The wide permitted middle of an ordinary life. 5 words, 5 weights, and each and every one of them, God willing, will have a night of its own in our Wednesday and Saturday gatherings in the future, as there is an ocean within each one. Tonight I'm only laying the map down because we need one of the five now, and we need it very, very exactly. And that one is the wajib, the obligation. For it too is of two kinds. And this is where people are most often confused. Not every duty is laid on us in the same way. Some God places on each single soul by name. Others He places on the community as a whole. And the difference is the difference between what you owe alone and what we owe together. The first our scholars call wajib, the individual obligation. And in one of the primary books of Usul al-Fiqh by Shaykh al-Mudaffar, called Usul al-Fiqh, and the reference you can find in the write-up, he defines it, Shaykh Mudaffar defines it as the individual obligation is that which pertains to every legally responsible soul and does not fall away by the action of another. Your 5 daily prayers are one such. Your fasting, your hajj, your khums. And here is its heart. It does not fall away by the action of another. If every Muslim on earth had prayed the dawn prayer this morning, your dawn prayer is still owed by you. Why? Because God does not merely want the act of prayer to exist somewhere in the world. He wants your forehead on the ground, your soul bent low, because you need this. No one can stand before God in your place. You need to do that. But the second kind, and it is the kind our prayer over the dead belongs to, our scholars call wajib kifayi, from the word kifaya, which means sufficiency. Here the command falls not on each and every one of us individually, but on the whole community at once. And what God wills is simply that the deed be done by whoever does it. Again, we refer back to Shaykh al-Mudaffar, the references are all in the write-up. He writes, the collective obligation, wajib kifai, is that in which the existence of the act is sought from any responsible soul whatsoever. It is obligatory upon all, but the action of some suffices so it falls away from the rest. Yet, if they all abandon it and not one of them rises to it, then all of them deserve the punishment. Look at the mechanism of that, because it is really quite exact and extremely beautiful. It is laid upon everyone, but it is discharged for everyone the instant it is carried out. And for a prayer such as this, a single believer standing over the body is enough, one. When that one prays, the duty is lifted from the neck of the entire community. And every soul in it is acquitted before God regarding that. And yet, hold the other edge of it. Were a believer to die, and no one rose to pray over him, not one person, then it is not a single person who has sinned. It is everyone who has sinned. The whole community answers for the one it left unattended. Our own marjas, such as Sayyid Sistani, set it down plainly. He says, and the reference again you can find in the write-up, the prayer over the deceased is a collective obligation upon every mature, sane person. If some undertake it, it falls away from the rest. And if all abandon it, they all sin. And do not mistake this collective duty to be a lesser duty. It is a mercy and a safeguard. It is how God makes certain that the dead are always honored, the drowning always have a hand reaching for them, the sick always find a healer, the community always keeps a scholar, without crushing every single back beneath the weight of every single task. The reply to a salam, the rescue of a man from the water, the study of medicine, the study of religion deeply enough in order to guide others, all of these are of this same kind, wajib kifai, owed by everyone, carried by some, and a mercy upon everyone. And there is a point where the two kinds touch. If a shared duty finds only one pair of hands able to do it, You are the only Muslim beside a dying believer in some faraway place. You are the only doctor when a man collapses. Then the collective duty narrows to a single point and becomes yours alone, an individual one that you may not walk away from. And even here in the funeral prayer, the wali, the deceased's own next of kin, carries a prior right to it, which is why we saw said Mustafa Khamenei lead it in Mashhad. But those are the edges of the matter. Hold on to its heart. And so come back now to our leader and see what all of this means. The prayer over him was a collective obligation. It was laid upon the entire Ummah. And when those millions rose in city after city and prayed, they were not praying only for themselves. They were discharging the duty on behalf of every believer alive, lifting it from the neck of the Ummah, from Mashhad to Manila to Montreal to Martinique. So there is no believer anywhere left standing in sin for not having prayed it. It was answered in full by his brothers and sisters who stood at his body for every one of us. That is the wajib, and it was carried. And now the one line left to draw for the believer far away. Because a careful soul might still ask, but could I not at least have prayed it myself over him from where I stood, thousands of miles away? And here the law is precise, and we must not blur it. The obligatory funeral prayer requires the body to be present before you. We go back to Ayatollah Sayyid Yazdi from Urwat al-Wuthqa, you can find the reference in the write-up, who says, the first condition, the presence of the deceased. So the prayer over the absent is not valid. Yes, there is no harm in supplicating for him and seeking forgiveness for him and gifting him the reward. Listen to both halves of this ruling, because our answer lives within it. If we who are far away, say in the West, we're before a screen, we did not and could not pray the obligatory prayer over him. To pray the obligatory, the wajib over an absent body is not our way. And to follow an imam through a television is not a true congregation at all. So let no one imagine he discharged an obligation from his living room. And as we have just seen, he was never in default of the obligation in the first place, for it was carried for him by those who stood at the body. But, and here is the mercy, in the very next breath of the same ruling, there is no harm in supplicating for him. And because this prayer is at its very heart a dua, a supplication, you may stand wherever on the earth that you are. You face the Qibla and say those same words, the testimony, the blessing, and the plea for the believers, and we know of him nothing except good. Not as an obligatory prayer, but as a supplication, a mustahab, a recommended activity, an offering of the kind that we named moments ago, made with the hope that its reward is sent onward to his soul. That is something every believer alive could, and I am sure did do. Know the difference, and it is a gift. Blur it, and you cheat yourself of clarity in your own faith. The wajib was carried on behalf of all of us by those who stood over his body. The supplication, the dua, belonged to the entire world. So the prayer over him was borne by the millions who stood at his body in Mashhad, in Karbala, in Najaf, in Qom, in Tehran, and by the believer alone in their home a world away, who raised his or her hands and said the very same words for him, but with the intention being mustahab. One prayer said by each and every one of us. Hold on to that. We will meet it again before this night is out. Please give me a salawat and we move to the lesson for the day.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد عجل الفرج.
So here's what I want you to carry out of this point. The law is never arbitrary. There is an adab, there is a courtesy, there is an order, there is a sacred sense of precedent, even in death, even in a grave, even in the timing of burial. And look at the order our leader was given. even as a body that could no longer choose for itself. He was carried past Imam Ali in Najaf, then past Imam al-Hussein in Karbala, then past Imams al-Kadhim and Jawad in Kadhimiyya, then past Imam al-Hadi and al-Askari in Samarra, and then laid to rest beside Imam al-Ridha in Mashhad. Of course, prior to that, Qom and Shah Abdul Azim and Imam al-Khamenei and so on. And his burial itself was moved aside, it was held back, so that it would not crowd in front of the mourning of Imam al-Hussein. Do we see what this means? In death, he did exactly what he did in life. He stepped back, he put Imam al-Hussein first. For decades, every Muharram, this man wept for Imam al-Hussein, and he taught the entire Ummah to set Karbala as the center of everything. And now, in the very manner of his burial, the law made him do it one last time. Even his grave waited upon Imam al-Hussein. So let our grief be ordered the way his was. Imam al-Hussein first, always. And trust the law that held him, because it did not abandon him in the waiting. It guarded him, it carried him, it washed him and wrapped him, and laid him down in its own right time exactly as it should. The trust was kept. Now we move on to the next point, the sanctity of the entrusted body. So the wait was lawful, we've proven that. But there is a second question, quieter than the first perhaps, but deeper. The first question was about the law. Was the waiting allowed? This one is about the man. Did the waiting cost him anything? 4 months unburied, 4 months in refrigeration or in the cold, 4 months while the world turned and the wars raged and the body lay waiting. Did that diminish him? Did something of his honor leak away in those long months, some dignity that a swifter burial would have perhaps preserved? I want to answer that with the whole weight of our tradition behind us. No, not even by a single infinitesimally small degree. And to understand why, we have to understand what a believer's body is in the eyes of God. We think of the Kaaba as the most sacred thing on this earth. And we are right to. It is the house of God. It is the Qibla, the lodestar, the prayer direction of every prayer, the heart towards which billions face every day, multiple times a day. And yet, listen to what the Messenger of God taught about the believer and hold on to something, because this narration is very deep. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him, reports from Rasulullah, and the reference for this is in the write-up. He quotes Prophet Muhammad saying, the believer is greater in sanctity than the Kaaba. Greater than the Kaaba. Not equal to it, greater than the Kaaba. The Kaaba that we would give our lives to defend, the believer outweighs it in the eyes of God. And this is not a single narration alone, easily set aside as perhaps mistakenly understood. We have multiple narrations in the books of Hadith, another one from Al-Kafi, for example, with a very, very sound chain of narration. You can find the reference in the write-up. The believer is named among the very sanctities of God himself, again from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, who says, God the Mighty, the Majestic, has 5 sanctities in his lands. The sanctity of the Messenger of God, the sanctity of the family of the Messenger of God, the sanctity of the Book of God, the sanctity of the Kaaba of God, and the sanctity of the believer. Look at the company that the believer keeps in this sentence. The Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt, the family of the Messenger of God, the Quran, the Kaaba, and then the believer. All of them set down in a single sentence among the 5 things God has made inviolable upon his earth. Now, if the sanctity of any believer, if the body of the most ordinary, anonymous servant of God carries an inviolability greater than that of the Kaaba, then what shall we say of this believer? The one who carried the Wilayah for decades, the one who was struck down in the path of God in the month of Ramadan while fasting. This we should think about. So look again at these 4 months and see them now for what they were. They were not 4 months of dishonor. They were 4 months of guarding. 4 months in which the entire Ummah stood watch over what had been entrusted to it, preserving it, protecting it, keeping it from every harm in a time of war, until it could be carried with the whole world gathered and the whole world watching to the place where it belonged. This is anything but neglect. This is the highest honor that a community can pay, to treat that which is entrusted to it as a sacred trust, and to return it at last undiminished. The body was the amana, the trust, and the ummah, the community, kept it. The trust was kept. And the proof of this is Karbala itself. If we really want proof, the last unanswerable proof that no delay and no indignity can take a single thing from a body that God has honored, then we don't need to go and search for it in great detail. We already carry it within our hearts. Karbala. When the master of martyrs fell, Imam Hussein ibn Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, his body was not washed on that same day. Neither was it shrouded, neither was it buried. It was left upon the sand, and worse than left. The son of Sa'ad, may God's mercy be far from him, called out for the men who would ride their horses over the body of Imam al-Hussein, and 10 of them came forward, and we mentioned them in the Maqtal for the night of Ashura, and they trampled him until his chest and his back were crushed. This is logged in all of the narrations, such as Tabari, such as Kitab al-Irshad, such as Lahuf of Sayyid ibn Tawus. The most honored body on the face of this earth, exposed, trampled, denied a grave for a day, and by some accounts much longer. And then the believers came. A tribe of the Banu Asad camped nearby at Ghadariyah. They came out to that field and they shrouded the 72 and they prayed the funeral prayer over them and laid them to rest on the earth. I know what everyone is thinking. Wait. Imam Hussein, where his shrine now stands, his son Ali al-Akbar at his feet, his family gathered into a single grave at his feet, his brother Abbas where he had fallen. Now hold the two images together in a single hand. The body crushed into the dust on the 10th of Muharram, and the shrine that 14 centuries of believers have crossed deserts to reach. The grave, our narrations say, 70,000 angels surround, constantly weeping and praying until the day of resurrection. Did the delay diminish Imam al-Hussein? Did the trampling and mutilation damage him at all? No. Did the days that his body lay denied a grave take one single atom's weight from the rank of the master of the martyrs? We all know the answer. The whole of our faith is the answer. It took away nothing. It could take nothing. And there is one more detail, and it belongs to tonight especially. For our tradition holds that no one washes and buries an imam but an imam. So the one who presided over the burial in Karbala was Imam Hussein's own son, Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zayn al-Abidin, peace and blessings be upon him, brought to that field for it and returned. Imam al-Ridha himself laid down the principle when the doubters asked him who had buried Imam al-Hussein. It was an imam. And the same God who brought Imam Sajjad to Karbala, he said, brings an imam to every burial that has the need of one. The same Imam al-Ridha beside whom our own leader now lies. So here's the argument, and I can give you none stronger. If the body of Imam al-Hussein, trampled, exposed, kept from its grave by the hatred of the enemy, lost nothing of its sanctity, then the body of our beloved leader, washed, shrouded, prayed over in city after city, guarded through a lawful and deliberate wait, and laid to rest beside an imam, could lose nothing of his. What was done to Imam al-Hussein in hatred could not diminish him. What was done for our leader out of love and within the law could never diminish him. Now, an honest word about preservation. Now, some of you will have heard it said, and said with love, that his body was found untouched, preserved, as though the very earth and air refused to act upon it. And I have to be honest with you, because as I've said, honesty is the method of this series and all of our sessions, and I'm not going to trade it for comfort. There is a narration, our Sunni brethren hold to it, that the earth does not consume the bodies of the prophets. But notice two things. It speaks firstly of the prophets, and our leader, for all of his greatness, did not claim, nor do we claim for him, the station of prophethood. So the narration, even where it is held, does not reach him. And in our own books, I did not find a sound chain of narration that says the believer's body, what the report says of the prophet's body. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I haven't found it. So I'm not going to stand here and sell you a miracle that I cannot source. The truthful answer as to how was his body kept all of these months is the answer we already gave you in the first point, from the ruling of our own scholars. It was lawfully preserved, kept from the decay by permitted means, as the law allows when there is a reason to wait. And you know what? That answer is better than the miracle, because the miracle would have made him the exception. The law makes him one of us, a believer whose body was honored exactly as the sacred law honors every believer's body, guarded, preserved, returned with dignity. We don't need to invent a wonder. The truth in itself is already a wonder, that God placed in the heart of his law such a care for the dignity of a single human being. And in any case, he was never only a body. And here's the deepest reason the weight could not touch him. Because the thing we have been calling him, the body in the cold, the body on the long road home, was never the whole of him. It was never even the most of him. Go back one last time to the verse that has carried this entire series. Quran, Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, third chapter of the Quran, verse 169. Rather, they are alive with their Lord, receiving provision. He is alive. He has been alive every single day of these 4 months, and he continues to be alive. While we have wept over a body, he was with his Lord, receiving provision, rejoicing, and gazing back at us. His life never hung on the timing of a burial. His honor was never in the keeping of the calendar. The grave does not hold him. It never could. It only receives what he has already left behind. The waiting could not diminish him, because the waiting only ever touched the part of him he had already finished with. And the lesson from all of this? So here's what I want you to take away from this point. How a people treats what is entrusted to it in the waiting, that is the measure of its faith. And understand, 2 trusts were placed in our hands the day that he was taken. The first was his body. The Ummah guarded it through 4 long months and laid it down this week with great honor. That trust is discharged. But the second trust is not laid in any grave. The second trust is his testimony, his path, the work he gave his life to, the Wilayah he never set down. And that trust has been handed to us through Imam Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei. It's the first trust the earth took back a couple of days ago. The second one will never be set down, not tomorrow, not ever. So we should be the keepers and the followers and the lovers of that second amana. The whole purpose of what we do is to say the names of these shuhada, to continue the work of these martyrs, and to refuse their erasure. The whole purpose of sites like, for example, the martyr of this gathering, as I said, this is what this is. So we guard the trust that was guarded for us. The trust was kept. And finally, the homecoming. So we've spoken about the weight. We've spoken about the trust. Now I want to speak about the road he traveled these last days while the whole world watched. Because he didn't go quietly into the ground. His body moved, carried on the shoulders of tens of millions, through the cities of the people of the house. And I want you to see the road for what it really is. It was not a journey to a grave. Rather, it was a journey home. He has been laid to rest in Mashhad, in a place called Dar al-Zikr, in the maqam of Imam, in the shrine of Imam al-Ridha, very close to the 8th Imam, Imam al-Ridha, like I said. And our scholars have a very beautiful word for where he has been placed. It's called jiwar, neighborhood, to be buried as the neighbor of one of the friends of God. We said it in the first point that the Lord does not merely permit burial near the awliya, rather it loves it. It counts it amongst the most recommended places to be buried. So his resting place is not an accident of geography. It is the last testimony of a man's heart, of where in the end he wished to lie. But there's something here that goes deeper than mere honor. Something that turns this whole night upon its hinge. Because Imam al-Ridha, peace and blessings be upon him, knew what it was to be buried far from home. He was carried from Medina to the very far edge of the province of Khorasan, to die there by poison, wronged, and a stranger in a strange land. And he foretold it himself. He said, the references in the write-up, I shall be killed by poison, wronged and buried in a land of estrangement. And then listen, he made a promise about that very estrangement. So whoever visits me in my estrangement, my visitation becomes binding for him on the day of resurrection. The references are on the write-up. Estrangement, what we call ghurba, the condition of being far away from where you belong. And do you see what God has done? Our leader spent 4 months in an estrangement of his own. Not the estrangement of distance, but the estrangement of the long unburied weight. The believer kept from his grave by the violence of the unjust world. And now, out of that estrangement, he has been carried home to rest beside the Imam of estrangement, the one who knows exactly what it is to be the stranger, wronged and far from home, the one who promised to receive on the day of judgment everyone who comes to him there. The stranger comes to rest beside the stranger. And Imam al-Ridha, peace and blessings be upon him, told us the truth about every one of his own family. The references in the write-up, he said, by God, there is not one of us but is slain a martyr. So the host of this burial is himself a martyr. A wronged one welcomes a wronged one. A witness receives a witness. And the road that runs through the whole of the house. Let's look at the road itself. It was not carried straight to Mashhad. It was carried past Shah Abdul Azim in Shahraray in Tehran, southern Tehran. It was taken past Imam al-Khamenei in the area between Tehran and Qom. It was taken past Sayyidah Fatima Ma'suma in Qom. And then it was taken on to Iraq, past Imam Ali in Najaf, past Imam Hussein in Karbala, past the Imams al-Kadhim and al-Jawad in Kadhimiyya, past the Imams al-Hadi and al-Askari in Samarra, and only then home to Imam al-Ridha. One after another of the house of the Prophet, past the father and the son, to rest beside the grandson. It was not a route a committee designed. It was a procession through the family of the Prophet, as though before he could be allowed to rest, he had to first greet each and every one of them. Not a journey to a grave, a journey home through the house of the Messenger of God. And had Medina not been occupied by the lowest of the low, then be certain he would have passed Medina and he would have passed Mecca. And when the earth at last received him, it received him under the oldest words we have for loss. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To him we return. Not from us he is taken. To him he returns. The deposit given back to the one who left it with us. And he was laid down on the night of the witness. And now the detail which for me holds the whole sermon in a single fold of the calendar. He was buried 2 days ago, on Thursday the 9th of July 2026, on the eve of the martyrdom of Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zayn al-Abidin, peace and blessings be upon him. Imam Sajjad, the one who survived Karbala. When the men of Imam Hussein's camp were slaughtered, he was the one God kept back, sick, barely alive, the thread that did not snap. And from the ashes of a butchered household, he rose to carry the testimony of Karbala forward across decades of grief. He is the proof that the chain does not break even when the men are all slain. The survivor who became the witness. And our leader was laid in the earth on the eve of his night. And then yesterday, the very next day, the whole of the Ummah mourned the passing of that same Imam, Imam Sajjad. And tonight, the night after, we have gathered. The witness laid to rest on the eve of the witness who carried the trust onwards. And we gathered in the days just after to take up what he left. Now we go to the one who now carries it through his own grief. And this is no longer merely a parable. It is being lived in front of us by a single bereaved man. The trust of the Wilayah has passed to Imam Sayyid Mujtaba al-Husseini al-Khamenei, may God protect him. appointed by the Assembly of Experts within days of the strike, and we explained his succession and why it is not hereditary in the second session in the testimony. But understand what this man carries. He was wounded in the same attack, and he does not only bury his father, he buries his wife, his sister's child, his brother-in-law, an entire household, his sister's child being a girl, a child of 14 months, an entire household laid down at once. And from within that emptied house, he takes up the guardianship of the Ummah. Do you see it? It is Karbala's own pattern being repeated. Like the son of Imam al-Hussein, who rose from the wreckage of his slaughtered family to carry the message, Imam Mujtaba, may God protect him, lifts the Wilayah out of his own grief. So when we speak of allegiance to the new wali, understand whose hand it is that now receives this trust. It is a wounded hand, a grieving hand, a hand that has just lowered its own beloved into the ground. That does not weaken the call to stand with him. Rather, it is the very reason to stand with him. And what the trust now asks of us, of the living. So the body comes home, the trust passes on, and the question turns at last to us. What does the living Ummah do now? There is a bond that does not end at the grave, it begins there. We call it ziyarah or visitation. And Imam al-Ridha, peace and blessings be upon him, taught us that it is not an optional sentiment. Rather, it is the fulfillment of a covenant. Imam al-Ridha says, references in the write-up, every Imam has a covenant upon the necks of his friends and his Shia, and part of the perfect fulfillment of that covenant is visiting their graves. A covenant upon our necks. Again, this word amana, now in the form of a bond we are being asked to keep by going to them. But here I have to stop you, because everything in this final point depends on what comes next. We have to ask, visiting is of what kind? Please give me a loud salawat, and we go to what the ziyarah is and what it is not.
اللهم صل
اللهم
على
صل على
محمد
محمد
وآل
وآل
محمد
محمد
عجل فرجه.
وعجل فرجه.
Because there is a way of visiting that is no visitation at all. There is a way of standing at the grave of a martyr that the martyr would not recognize. We've all seen it. The visit as a stamp in a passport, the visit as a photograph, the visit as a marker of status. I have been, look at where I stood, look at how wonderful I am. The visit as a transaction. I have made my ziyarah or my hajj, I have touched the shrine of Imam al-Hussein, and now my account is settled and heaven is owed to me. I want to say this as plainly as I can. That is both a mistake and a misguidance. To travel to the place of the one who gave everything for God, and to go there for the sake of yourself, for your standing, for your story, for a private receipt against your sins, is to miss the entire point of why he is worth visiting at all. So what is that point? The ziyarah texts themselves tell us. We need to read them. And I mean really read them, not just say them on Thursdays or whenever we say, not just like, Assalamu alaikum ya. No, read them properly. And you find that when we stand before an Imam, we do not sit and list his miracles. We bear witness to why he was worthy. And it is the same testimony at every grave. You can look it up. The references are in the write-up. We say, I bear witness that you established the prayer, that you gave the alms, and you enjoined the good and forbade the evil. In Arabic we say, أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر. That is the criterion. That is what we're saluting. And to visit them, and this is important, is to pledge ourselves to that same path. So look closely, look very closely at what we're actually saying. You establish the prayer. Not merely prayed, establish. There is a world between these two. To pray is to stand before God yourself. To establish the prayer is to build the conditions in which a whole community can stand before God. To raise a society in which the prayer is alive in the street. not just performed behind a closed door. It is not the same as putting up a mosque. It is making a world in which the mosque actually means something. Second, you give the alms. And the alms are no afterthought to the prayer. They are bound to it. Think of the man who cannot feed his children. Can such a man stand in prayer with a still heart? His body is on the prayer mat, but his mind is on the empty table and his children. So to lift the poor is to protect the prayer and to establish the prayer, a requirement to establish the prayer, to clear the ground on which a person can finally turn to God without his hunger and his worry about the hunger pulling him away. Then you enjoined the good and you forbade the evil. And here we must be most careful, because this is the duty we have most thoroughly shrunk down. We have taken the towering prophetic command to stand against wrong, and we have folded it down to small until it fits in a kitchen, until it's about a shoe. We imagine the munkar, the evil we are called to confront, is the music playing on the bus, or the man eating in the market in the month of Ramadan, or the lady whose strand of hair is showing, or anything like this. And meanwhile, Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, thundered this from his exile, thundered against this from his exile. Meanwhile, we stand oblivious to the far greater evils, the tyranny, the plunder, the murder of nations, the empires that bomb school children and say collateral damage or accident. That is the amr bil ma'ruf that the imams establish, not the policing of small private things, the standing at real cost against the munkar or the evil of the powerful. We open this wound at length in our Arba'een sessions. Tonight it's enough for us to name it. We invite everyone to view our Arba'een sessions. They'll be starting on the 15th of Safar, God willing. This is the path that the ziyarah asks us to walk, to establish the prayer, to lift the poor, to stand against the wrong of the strong. And the one thing that makes it real, the intention. I had said we'll come to the intention. Even all of that can be hollowed out from within if it is done for the wrong reason. So let me give you the key that unlocks the whole of it. Listen to how God describes the household of the Prophet in Surah Insan, the chapter of humanity, 76th chapter of the Quran, verse number 9. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, he's quoting from Ahlul Bayt, he's saying, "We feed you only for the face of God. We desire from you no reward and no thanks, only for the face of God." Our commentators notice something breathtaking about this verse. You can find the references all in the write-up. The Ahlul Bayt did not even say these words aloud to the poor at their door. They did not announce their sincerity. They concealed it within their hearts, and God himself reached in and disclosed what they had hidden and wrote it into his eternal book. That is the summit of what we call ikhlas, sincerity that is so pure it does not even want to be seen being sincere. Now hold that next to the other thing we know so well, the name carved into the marble of the new wing of the masjid, the donor's name printed on the cover of the Quran, the plaque, the mention, the credit, all of the kudos. I'm not telling you that these things are forbidden. I'm not saying that. I'm telling you that they are a different universe from liwajhillah, for the face of God. And here is why this matters far more than we think. There are people who treat the whole of faith like a bank. A prayer earns 10 units of reward. In congregation, 25 times that. And so they pile up the credits. Millions of units, billions of units, trillions of units. Maybe they think they're the Elon Musk of heaven. A fortune of merit stored in heaven. And there is a terrible, devastating danger hidden within that arithmetic. Because suppose a person spends their entire life so busy accumulating, so consumed with building the balance, that they never notice the brother starving at his gate. Or that somewhere in the piling up, his worship quietly became about him, about his standing, his name, his greatness, a small and almost innocent seeming idolatry of the self. Such a man may die with a vast fortune of merit stored up in heaven, but have no way to reach it, because he is not there. God warns us of exactly this, and the image is merciless. In Quran, Surah Al-Furqan, the chapter of the criterion, 25th chapter of the Quran, verse number 23, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And we shall turn of whatever deeds they did and make them scattered dust." Scattered dust. A lifetime of deeds. And a single wrong intention turns the whole heap to dust on the wind. That is why the Imams taught us, and the references in the write-up, the intention of the believer is better than his deed. Better than his deed. Because the deed without the intention is dust. And the intention is the thing that makes the deed worth anything at all. So when we feed, when we give, when we pray, when we stand, let it be as Imam al-Hussein, as Sayyid Zainab, as Imam Ali, as Sayyid Fatima al-Zahra, and Prophet Muhammad, how they did everything. As Imam Khamenei, as Imam Khomeini, as Sayyid Hassan, how they did everything. Qurbatan ilallah, for the sake of Allah, for nearness to God, for His face. Wanting no reward and wanting no thanks. And now, here is where everything comes home. If everything we have said, if this is what ziyarah truly is, it's not tourism and it's not a transaction, but it's a covenant to become like the one that you're saluting with the right intention, undertaken purely for the sake of God, then listen to the freedom in this. 43 million people walked with the body in these past few days, and blessed are they. But most of us were not amongst them. Most of us are thousands of miles away in our own houses, in our rooms on the wrong side of the world. And yet it doesn't matter. Because if your heart goes to Him in truth, if you stand where you are and you take up His path for the face of God, then you have made the ziyarah, the visitation. The fruit of ziyarah is not the dust on the road on your feet. The fruit of ziyarah is that you become more like the one you came to salute, and thereby you draw nearer to God. And that, the believer alone in his room, taking up the path, is a ziyarah as real as any made by the millions, tens of millions on the road. And the final lesson for today. So here is the charge of this point and of the whole night. 43 million people carried his body. But the body is not the trust. Be his pallbearers in the thing that matters. Visit him at the shrine or from your own home. It is the same. By taking up what he carried. Establish the prayer where you stand. Not just pray, establish the prayer. Lift the poor at your own gate. And that doesn't mean just the poor Muslim. Lift the poor. There is no qualifier. And stand against the evil, the munkar of the powerful, whatever the cost. Obviously with intelligence, with sensibility. And above all, do it for the face of God alone. Near or far, with the right heart, you keep the trust. The trust was kept. Now let us carry it home. Please give me a salawat and we go to the final command, the one command.
اللهم صل على محمد
So 3 nights across this series we have stood together. On the night of the chain, the first one, we said the institution does not break, the Wilayah outlives any man. On the night of testimony, on the Arba'een, on the 40th, we said the message does not die, the witness only grows louder. And tonight, the trust, the amana is kept and carried home. The body returned to its Lord and the covenant now placed in our hands. The chain unbroken, the testimony unbroken, and the trust unbroken. And if you ask me, after all of this, after the law and the sanctity and the long road home, What is the one thing that we need to ask of ourselves? A single thing to carry out of this room? I'm not going to give you my own word for it. I will give you the cry the believers have raised over his very coffin, the slogan of his farewell. Qiyam lillah, qumu lillah, rise for God. And it's not a slogan someone just randomly invented for a banner. It is a command of the Quran. In Quran, Surah Saba, the chapter of Sheba, 34th chapter of the Quran, verse number 46, God says, and this is important, say, I admonish you with but one thing, that you rise for God in twos and singly. One thing, only one. Out of the whole of the religion, God reduces the admonition to a single word. Rise for God. And hear how he says it, mathna wa furada, in twos and singly, meaning together and alone. Do we understand what that means tonight? The together is the 43 million odd on the road to Mashhad, the Ummah risen as a single body. But the alone, furada, one by one, that is you and me, in our houses, in our rooms, on the far side of the world, rising for God when no one sees you, with no procession around us, no crowd to carry us. Both are the rising. Both are commanded. The millions on the road and the lone believer who takes up the path for the face of God. Mathna wa furada. And neither is greater than the other. This is the whole of it. The ziyarah of the path is the qiyam, or the rising lillah. To rise for God is to keep the trust. So we will now turn to remember him and those who fell with him, and to ask God to make us worthy. And then we will have a few other elements, including a very important hymn, which I think everyone should focus on. And when we hear that, let that be our answer. We have heard the command, qumu lillah. Now let us rise. Please give me a salawat and we do the supplication and the eulogy before we move on to the other elements of the program.
اللهم صل على
صل على محمد وآل
آل
محمد.
محمد وانجا.
So now I want to set the teaching down. No more proofs, no more rulings, no more lessons, just remembrance. Tonight of all nights, with him newly returned to the earth, 2 days laid to rest, I want us to say their names, to let their names fill this room. Because as we've learned across the whole series, saying the names is itself the keeping of the trust. So firstly, there is a chain of blood that runs through the whole of human history, and tonight he has taken his place in it. It began with Abel, the son of Adam, the first to be killed for refusing to raise his hand against God's command. It runs through every prophet, hunted, and every messenger struck down. It gathers at its heart the plain of Karbala, Imam Hussein ibn Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, and the 72 lights that would not flicker who fell beside him. And it does not stop there. It runs on, unbroken, into our own days. We remember Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi, who built the resistance from nothing and was martyred with his wife and his child. We remember Haj Imad Baghdiyya, the shadow the empires hunted for 30 years. We remember Haj Qasim Sulaymani, the general who wept at the grave of Imam al-Hussein, struck down by a coward's drone on the road from the airport. We remember Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the voice that never once trembled, buried as our new leader is buried now, only after a long and patient wait. And tonight, at the head of that procession, we lay down our own leader, Imam Sayyid Ali al-Husseini al-Khamenei, al-Wali, al-Faqih, al-Mujahid, al-Shaheed. One chain, from Abel to this very night. Each a link a witness. Each name a trust we refuse to let fall silent. And now, my master, let me speak to you. To you who carried the Wilayah for more than 3 decades and never set it down. To you who buried your generals one by one and did not break. To you who taught the whole Ummah to put Hussein at the center of everything, and who, in the very manner of your burial, were made to step aside for Imam al-Hussein a final time. You did not fall on a field of battle sword in hand. You were struck in your own home by a fire sent from far away. thus the one slain in injustice. And the law washed you and wrapped you in white and carried you home, past Imam Ali, past Imam al-Hussein, to rest beside Imam al-Ridha, on the eve of the one who survived Karbala to carry it forward. You were not alone when you fell. A household was laid down with you, and we named them gently, and we do not linger, for the grief is too near. Your daughter, Sayyida Bushra, your son-in-law, Dr. Bagheri, the husband of your daughter Huda, Sayyida Huda, whom God spared. Your daughter-in-law, Sayyida Zahra Haddad Adil, the wife of your son and our new leader. And your granddaughter, Zahra, 14 months old. We will say it once and let the silence carry the rest. And with you fell the commanders of the Ummah, the men who stood at the frontiers and did not yield. We will not call their roll tonight. There are too many and the night is long. We gather them instead into the words of Imam Sajjad himself, for it is his night, and there is no better tongue tonight than his. He prayed for exactly such men. O God, bless Muhammad and his household, and fortify the frontiers of the Muslims through your might, and strengthen their defenders through your power. And this is, of course, from the supplication of the people of the frontiers, which we will be discussing during our Arba'een sessions. And we remember, at the last, the smallest of them, the ones who never had the chance to choose. On the same morning as he was taken, the first morning of the war, far to the south in the small town of Minab, a missile fell, then another missile fell, then a third missile fell on a school called Shajara Tayyiba, the good tree. 168 children with their teachers were martyred, and among them a teacher carrying a child not yet born. The greatest of the Ummah and its very least, its leader and its school children, gathered into martyrdom on a single morning. We told their full story in our Ashura and Arba'een nights. Tonight we will only fold them with their teachers and their unborn into the same mercy that holds the children of Karbala. All of them. Every name we have spoken and every name only God knows. They are alive with their Lord, receiving provision. And now part 2, the turn. Now we turn to the one who received them. O our Lord, you told us the martyrs are alive with you, that they are provided for, that they rejoice. We believe you. We cling to this tonight because without it, the weight of what has been taken would be more than we can carry. So we do not ask you to comfort our leader. He is with you and needs nothing from us. We ask you to comfort us, the ones left behind, who must now carry what he carried. O Lord, accept him, accept his decades and his 8 years of war and the decades of siege and every loss he bore without ever bending. Raise him with the witnesses that he loved, with Imam al-Hussein, whom he set before himself even in his grave, with Imam Ali, with Imam al-Ridha, in whose neighborhood he now rests. And reward the patience this long wait demanded of him and of an ummah that guarded its trust for 4 months and returned it with honor. O our Lord, for the household laid down with him, his daughter, his children's children, the infant of 14 months, gather them into the arms that hold Ali al-Asghar and Ruqayya and the children of Karbala. And for his wife and his daughter whom you've spared, and for every heart broken in that house, send down a patience worthy of the family of the Prophet. O our Lord, strengthen the one who now carries the trust, our beloved Imam, Sayyid Mujtaba al-Husseini al-Khamenei, who buried his father, his wife, his sister and his sister's child, and rose from that emptied home to take up the guardianship of the entire Ummah. Make him, as his father were before him, a lantern on the path and a shield for the oppressed. Steady his hand, surround him with the sincere, and keep far from him the treacherous, and gather the scholars and the believers around him as one like iron. O our Lord, for the Ummah that mourns tonight, for Iran under its bombs and its sieges, for Gaza still buried under its rubble, for Lebanon, for Yemen, and every land where the people of truth are being made to bleed even in the West. Be their refuge, lift the oppressed, break the arrogance of the oppressor, and let the blood of these martyrs be not the end of something, but the turning of it. O our Lord, make us of those who rise, not only in the crowd but alone, not only on the road to the shrine, but in our own homes, for your face alone. Make our visitation a walking of the path, that we establish the prayer, and lift the poor, and stand against the wrong or the powerful. and seek from it no reward and no thanks except you. Our Lord, hasten the one for whom all of this waits, the Imam of our age, may our souls be his ransom. Let this burial and every burial be one more step toward the morning of his rise, when the last witness comes to gather every testimony and fill the earth with justice as it has been promised. Amen, O Lord, sustainer of the worlds. Amen, O most merciful of the merciful. And we seal it as we seal every night of this series, on the verse that has carried us through all three. The promise that he is not gone, only returned, not dead, but alive. Rather, they are alive with their Lord, receiving provision. They are not dead, the chain is unbroken, the testimony is unbroken, and the trust is kept. وآخر الدعوان الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.